You want me to put that on my todger?
This One's Wife. Closing ceremony with the kids. Hello, I'm H.G. Tudor. This One's Wife has been sent home, although she claims, through her spokespeople, that it was pre-planned. The evidence and the behaviour of a narcissist suggests that she was sent home. As I explained yesterday, the opportunity to remain and obtain all of that fuel to continue to manage the facade would be too tempting for her narcissism to say, no, go home early. I understand there's been some suggestion that she felt that she'd gathered enough content, had become bored, and therefore decided to go. Whilst one could understand that being suggested as a proposition, that wouldn't accord with her narcissism. The fact is that her sense of entitlement would cause her to want to continue to obtain footage of her being adored. You'll recall there was nobody booing her when she was there. There was nobody shouting at her at the games, "Clear off back to California, you grifting maniac." No, people were, at the minimum, polite and, in other instances, enthusiastic in their greeting of her. The hugs were doled out, the waves were given, the cheers were heard, and all of that is most addictive to the narcissist. Not only would she want to remain to receive all of this pure positive fuel, particularly in light of the rough ride that she's had as of late, but also she would want to be able to record all of this to show to the world, see, those of you that are haters, that is simply what you are. I am loved, I am adored. And thus the lure of that delicious, edifying, power-inducing fuel would have been too much. More likely, she was sent back either by the organisers of Invictus, who said, "We are sick and tired of you overshadowing matters and your behaviour isn't appropriate," or that Harry grew a pair, or perhaps found himself between a rock and a hard place, where he'd been told, either she goes or you both have to go. Either way, she left. And she either left because she was forced or she flounced following an argument. But is that the end of the matter? Naturally, it is not when it comes to the narcissist. Those of you who have had an involvement with a narcissist will recall that one of the remarkable aspects of the dynamic is how you can have a blazing row with a narcissist. The narcissist perhaps storms out, slams the door, yelling over their shoulder, "I never want to hear from you again." And then the narcissist reappears 15 minutes or 30 minutes later and acts as if the argument never took place. There's no slinking back in and looking bashful. There's no feeling awkward. They just stroll back in and go, "Hey, how's it going?" And you're left thinking to yourself, did I imagine that argument? Did I imagine that we were fighting tooth and claw earlier on? Because they're behaving like that didn't happen. This is the capacity of the narcissist to compartmentalize. As I've made clear on a number of occasions, the narcissist operates in the moment, and now this moment, and now this moment. Each second, if you will, is its separate arena, and they're only connected if the narcissism needs to connect them, in terms of, for instance, bringing up the past or utilizing the future by way of future faking. Thus, the narcissist will have a blazing row with you, storm off, third assertion of control withdrawal, and then the reset button has been pressed. They're into the next arena, if you will, and they walk in, and it is the case that everything that has gone before is essentially forgotten, until such time as the narcissism needs to bring it up again. With this in mind, this leads to the potential of the return of this one's wife. She is now away from the Invictus Games. Naturally, she'll continue to want to draw attention to herself. More about that in due course. But what about the potential that she makes a return for the closing ceremony? What about the potential for her to return to the closing ceremony with the children? There'd be an opportunity to milk the situation for fuel, to be at the conclusion of what would be seen, at least by her, as a successful games, and an opportunity to overshadow the closing ceremony with her presence once again, thus giving her, in effect, the last word. The narcissist loves having the last word, because that's linked to the issue of control. By being the one to issue the final pronouncement, the narcissist seals the deal with regard to control. You may say something, the narcissist responds. You may say something again, the narcissist responds. And for this one's wife, it would prove particularly satisfactory for her to be able to return and milk all of that fuel and bring with her the children. The children have not been seen in a public setting. They've only ever been witnessed in staged incidences through filmed footage which has been released on the terms of this one's wife and Harry, or in photographs, concocted, AI-generated, photoshopped, whatever they might be, again on the terms of the Sussexes. They've not been witnessed live, if you will. Whilst, of course, huge attention would be on the children, which ordinarily would overshadow this one's wife, on this occasion, because she has returned with the children, thus it's her decision, and they are extensions of herself, that would enable her to be the one that's in control and drink in massive amounts of fuel by portraying the idyllic family all together. Her compartmentalization would enable her to just boldly turn up. And remember, this is a woman that has form for turning up on the red carpet as a +1 or even uninvited, for sharpening her elbows and getting into situations where she's not been invited, or where, in the moment, it's clear that she's not involved, but she pushes her way in. For instance, only yesterday, notice how she pushed herself into the situation where Harry was receiving a jar of Vegemite. Now, in the past, when Harry was talking to a group of men, she took over. She has no shame. There is no embarrassment. If there is an opportunity for her narcissism to pursue the prime aims, that's all that matters, and everything else can be cast to one side. Accordingly, given what's gone before, is irrelevant ultimately to this one's wife with regard to keeping her away. The fact that she's been told, go home, although she's obeyed it in this instance, ultimately withdrawing herself for the purpose of assertion of control, that doesn't mean that she would continue to obey it, because of course the narcissist is never subject to the rules, because they are a fetter upon that need for control. Thus, the lure of so much fuel, the lure of asserting control and managing the facade, and, in essence, having the last word, could prove particularly tempting to a narcissist such as this one's wife, so that she makes this supposed triumphant return at the closing ceremony, kids in tow. What suggests that it might not happen is the fact that it would require some effort for her to do this. She would have to organise to travel. There are people that she can instruct to do this on her behalf, but it's not like taking the kids outside for a press conference. She would have to organise them and travel back up to Vancouver. Narcissists, amongst lesser and mid-range, are relatively lazy. Lessers particularly so, where lower lesser and middle lesser, upper lesser A and B have more energy. Lower mid-range and middle mid-range are often found to be relatively lazy, and in the circumstances, whilst there is tempting fuel on offer and the attraction of the last word, that might ultimately fall by the wayside as a consequence of the narcissism essentially viewing it as too much like hard work to head back. Believe me, the injunction for her to stay away is meaningless to her now. That's in the past. She won't obey it if her narcissism chooses that she ought not to, because, of course, as I mentioned, the rules don't apply to the narcissist. That would not keep her away, being told, you have to go home. That was then. This is now. It is different considerations that are applicable to whether she would make a return. Driven by a sense of entitlement, the attraction of the fuel, the opportunity to manage the facade and also to have the last word would prove particularly attractive. And, utilising the device of triangulating people with the children, it would enable her to make a substantial impact. However, on balance, it would appear that there is a risk that it would prove too much in terms of effort, so that the narcissism would think, well, even though there is a big prize there's too much expenditure of energy and effort, so the return on the investment isn't as good as it could be. Having been told to stay away isn't going to stick. That is not what affects her decision-making. It is essentially, what can I get out of this, and how much is it going to cost me to achieve it? Remember, she's not consciously thinking in such terms. Her narcissism is doing it on her behalf. What do you think, valuable viewers? Do you think that there is a possibility that this one's wife will engineer a return to the closing ceremony to be seen, and that she might utilise the children to that extent? Or do you think that ultimately it'll prove too much like hard work for her to do, or that she still wishes to keep the children hidden for a variety of reasons, and therefore they wouldn't appear and perhaps she would alone? Let me know your thoughts in the comments section. I'm H.G. Tudor. Thank you for listening.